On August 15, 1914, a cargo ship called the Ancon made the first official crossing of the Panama Canal, passing from the Atlantic to the Pacific in a single day. Almost no one was watching. 11 days earlier, Germany had marched into Belgium, and the world's eyes were fixed on Europe. But that quiet passage closed out a story that had run for 33 years, killed more than 25,000 men, ruined 800,000 investors, destroyed the most celebrated engineer alive, and required the United States to help conjure an entire country out of a rebellion. The Panama Canal didn't just join two oceans. To build it, they split a continent in two. Today, we're looking at how a French hero's catastrophe, a swamp full of mosquitoes, and a revolution that lasted 3 days combined to carve a ditch through the Americas and redraw the map. Like and subscribe quickly before we dive in. Let's go back to 1869. In that year, a Frenchman named Ferdinand de Lesseps did something the world had thought impossible. He finished the Suez Canal, cutting a channel more than 100 miles through the Egyptian desert to join the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. It made him a national hero, and it made his investors rich. He was a diplomat, not an engineer, but none of that mattered now. He had proven the experts wrong once, and he intended to do it again. In May of 1879, de Lesseps gathered a Congress of delegates in Paris to plan a second canal, this time across Panama. Of the 136 men in the room, only 42 were engineers. One of them, a Frenchman named Adolphe Gaudin de Lépinay, stood up and warned them. Panama was not Egypt. It was jungle, mountain, and flood. Cutting a channel straight down to sea level, the way they had at Suez, would be a slaughter. Instead, he proposed damming the great river that crossed the route, drowning the valley to make a lake, and lifting ships over the mountains through a series of locks. They voted him down. Remember that plan. 25 years later, it would build the canal, after de Lesseps' idea had killed more than 20,000 men, because de Lesseps wanted exactly what he'd built at Suez, a sea level cut, ocean to ocean, no locks. He was 74 years old, and he had seen Panama in person exactly once, during the dry season when the rivers were low and the jungle looked almost gentle. Digging began in January of 1881, and almost at once Panama began doing what Lépinay had promised it would do. The Chagres River, calm and shallow when de Lesseps saw it, rose in the rains into a torrent that crossed the canal route more than a dozen times and swept away whatever the men built. Mudslides buried machines, supplies, and crews alive, and out of the standing water everywhere rose the mosquitoes. No one knew they were the enemy. The doctors at the French hospital blamed the night air and the fumes of rotting plants. To keep ants off the sick, nurses stood the legs of the hospital beds in little bowls of water and bred, in those very bowls, the mosquitoes that carried yellow fever and malaria straight through the open windows and onto the patients. In August of 1881, a Cuban doctor named Carlos Finley had already published the answer. The mosquito was the carrier. The world ignored him for 20 years. By 1884, more than 200 workers were dying every month. At the peak, some 40,000 men worked the isthmus, and 9 in 10 of them were Afro-Caribbean laborers from the West Indies, who died in the greatest numbers of all. Fresh engineers arrived from France and were dead within months of stepping off the boat. De Lesseps refused to change the plan. Only near the very end, in 1888, did he finally admit that locks might be needed and hire a rising young engineer named Gustave Eiffel, 1 year before the tower that would make him famous, to build them. It was too late. That December, the money ran out. The company collapsed. 800,000 ordinary French people lost their savings. It had spent close to $287 million, and it had no working canal to show for any of it. And when the wreckage was counted, more than 20,000 men were dead. Some estimates run higher still. The fallout tore through France. Investigators found that politicians and newspapers had been quietly bribed to keep the money flowing. In 1893, de Lesseps and his son Charles were convicted of fraud. The old man was 87 by then, and too broken to appear in court. The hero of Suez died the following year, in December of 1894. The jungle had won, and for a decade, the great ditch sat abandoned, filling with rust and vines. Then, in September of 1901, an assassin's bullet made Theodore Roosevelt President of the United States. Roosevelt wanted a canal, and he wanted it firmly in American hands. There was just one problem. Panama wasn't a country. It was a province of Colombia. So in 1903, the United States sat down with Colombia to buy the rights and finish the dig. The American offer was $10 million up front. Colombia wanted 25. That August, the Colombian Senate rejected the deal outright. Roosevelt was furious, and into that fury stepped one of the strangest figures in the entire story, Philippe Bunau Varilla. He was a French engineer who had worked on de Lesseps's failed canal, and who still stood to make a fortune if the Americans bought up the old French assets. He held no office. He was not Panamanian, but he saw exactly what was coming, and he moved. In a suite at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York, Bunau Varilla met the leaders of a Panamanian independence movement and wrote them a personal check for $100,000 to fund a revolt. In return, he would be made Panama's representative in Washington. On November 3, 1903, Panama declared independence. Colombia rushed troops to crush it, and found that the American-run railroad had quietly pulled its trains out of reach, stranding the soldiers where they landed. Offshore sat the U.S. warship Nashville. The revolution was essentially finished in 3 days, with almost no bloodshed. 3 days after it began, the United States recognized the new Republic of Panama. 15 days later, on November 18, 1903, a canal treaty was signed in Washington. It handed the United States a strip of land 10 miles wide across the whole of Panama, in perpetuity, along with the right to build. Panama would receive $10 million and a yearly rent. On its face, it was a treaty between two sovereign nations, but the man who signed it for Panama was Philippe Bunau Varilla, a Frenchman who had not set foot in Panama for 17 years and who would never go there again. No Panamanian signed it at all. Years later, Roosevelt described what he had done with total candor. "I took the isthmus, started the canal, and then left Congress not to debate the canal, but to debate me." The Americans took over the ditch in 1904, and at first they came close to repeating the French disaster. Yellow fever and malaria swept the camps. The first chief engineer fled home within a year. But this time, one man had read Carlos Finlay. Colonel William Gorgas, the chief sanitary officer, believed the mosquito theory that the French had laughed off. He declared war on the insect itself. His men drained swamps, poured oil over standing water, screened windows, and fumigated entire towns. It was slow, unglamorous, expensive work, and Gorgas had to fight his own superiors to keep the funding alive. But it worked. The last death from yellow fever in Panama City came in November of 1905. The disease that had defeated France was simply gone. The second decision was the plan. The new chief engineer, John Stevens, a railroad man, looked at the sea level scheme that had already killed 20,000 Frenchmen and threw it out. He went to Roosevelt and to Congress and argued for locks, for damming the Chagres, drowning the valley into a vast lake, and lifting ships over the mountains. It was almost exactly the plan Gaudin de l'Épinay had been shouted down for in 1879. This time it was approved. Then Stevens resigned too, and in 1907, Roosevelt handed the whole enterprise to an Army engineer who would not be permitted to walk away, George Washington, Goethals of the Corps of Engineers. Goethals split the canal into 3 fronts and drove all of them at once. 2 of them he could manage. The third nearly broke him. The Culebra Cut was a 9-mile trench that had to be carved straight through the spine of the Continental Divide. Up to 6,000 men worked it at any one time, drilling, blasting, and hauling out the spoil by the trainload, and the mountain fought back. Again and again, after heavy rain, entire hillsides simply slid into the trench, bearing track and shovels and swallowing months of work in a single afternoon. They dug it out and kept going. The men who did most of that digging and most of that dying were West Indian laborers, tens of thousands of them, drawn to Panama by wages they could never have earned at home. In the Canal Zone, they were paid less, housed apart, and separated by law from the white American workforce. When they were killed, by disease, by dynamite, by cave-ins, many were buried far from the islands they had come from. Their families never told exactly how they died. One of them, a Barbadian named Alfred Doughton, remembered the trainloads of the dead being hauled away, in his words, as if they were just so much lumber. Roughly 5,600 more men died under the Americans, on top of everything the French had lost. By 1913, the end was finally in sight. On May 20th, two steam shovels grinding toward each other from opposite ends of the Culebra Cut met at the bottom of the trench. The mountain was open. That June, the last gate of the enormous Gatun Dam swung shut, and the drowned valley behind it began to fill into what was then the largest artificial lake on Earth. On October 10, 1913, from a desk in Washington, President Woodrow Wilson pressed a single button, and a telegraph signal raced 2,000 miles south and blew apart the last dike standing between the diggings and the sea. The water poured in. The Atlantic and the Pacific were joined. It had cost more than $350 million, the most expensive thing the United States had ever built, and Goethals had finished 2 years ahead of schedule. And so, on August 15, 1914, the cargo ship Ancon made that first official passage from ocean to ocean. There were no visiting kings, no fleets of dignitaries. 11 days earlier, the First World War had begun, and the greatest engineering feat of the age opened almost in silence. Goethals didn't even ride the ship through. He followed it down the length of the canal from the bank, by train. But the story didn't end at the water's edge. Colombia never forgot how its province had been taken. For 18 years, it refused to recognize Panama at all. Finally, in 1921, the United States quietly paid Colombia $25 million, the exact sum Colombia had asked for before the revolution ever happened, to close the matter. An earlier version of that deal had included an American expression of regret. Before it passed, the apology was struck out. Filippo Bunau Varilla, the Frenchman who had signed away Panama's canal, got what he'd wanted out of the sale of the old French company, and he kept his word about one thing. He never returned to the country he had represented, and the canal itself was never truly Panama's. That 10-mile strip through the heart of the country stayed under American control, a foreign zone cutting the young nation in two. For most of the 20th century, it took decades of protest and men who died in the streets over which flag could be flown before that began to change. On the last day of 1999, at the very close of the century, the United States finally handed the Panama Canal back to Panama. The canal is usually told as a triumph, and as engineering, it was a mountain cut in half, an ocean lifted 85 feet over a continent and set gently down on the other side. But it was also a ditch that cost more than 25,000 lives, toppled a national hero, and required a great power to help invent a country, so there would be someone to sign the paper. The land was divided so that the world could be joined. More than a century later, the ships still come, and most of them still pass through in the same quiet the Ancon found. The morning a cargo boat crossed the continent, and almost no one looked up. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like if you learned something new. Remember to subscribe for more incredible stories and historical facts.